there's been times where someone might have said, God, you were really angry and you responded like that, because that other party or that person needs to know that that's not acceptable. That's why I'm showing that.
Hello and welcome to Psychology in the Wild. I'm Erin Shrimpton.
And I'm Dr. Gemma Lee Roberts.
And this is the podcast where we try to make sense of the wild chaos of everyday life. So Gemma, what has been wild this week?
I feel like I'm literally living our tagline this week, the wild chaos of everyday life. So there's nothing kind of particularly wild going on, but it has been like one crazy week. So some of the things I've been navigating this week, children not sleeping very well. So yesterday I just gave in. They've gone back to school. They're not sleeping very well since going back to school. They're 5 and 6, soon to be 7, but at the moment 5 and 6. So last night I gave in and put a mattress on the floor in my room. So Jake, my husband, moved to the spare room. One of the kids got into bed next to me, and the other one was on the mattress on the floor. And tonight we're doing the reverse. So whoever was on the floor will be in bed. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? I'm just going to do this till they're sleeping properly again, because we just all need a bit of rest and a bit of, it's not going to be forever is what I'm thinking. I feel like I was quite strict with sleep when they were younger. But now I know that it kind of goes in phases, and once they're in the swing of things, they'll be fine. So that's one wild thing going on. There's the sleep situation. So I've got a lot of concealer on under my eyes today. Other wild things. So Jake, my husband, has ADHD and hasn't been able to get medication for a month, which has been...
Is there a shortage?
Oh, yes. Yes, it is nuts. I can't even... I mean, I won't rant about this too much, but I can't even put into words how horrendous the process has been. And he still hasn't been able to locate it. I mean, he must have spoken to 100 pharmacies around us and different places we've been visiting across the UK. There's just a massive, massive shortage. And now he's kind of got a compromise where he's got a lower dose of what he normally has, because they can't get the actual dose anywhere. So we're kind of, and he started that again today. So he's hoping that does enough of what it needs to do. But I don't know how this plays out long term. It's really it really scares me for what's going to happen, because I can only assume this is going to continue in the UK. And it's not just ADHD medication. I know there's people that need to get hold of like HRT medication. They've been through similar things. So that's been really, really stressful. And, you know, poor Jake's been trying to manage this. And I've also been trying to manage it. I
mean, that's the type of thing that impacts, I mean, any shortage of any medication really impacts not just the person, but it impacts the whole ecosystem where they operate, i.e. their family.
100%.
And workplace and everything, you know, so it's a huge problem.
It's a massive problem. And it really got me thinking. And my other problem, my other issues with the school, I've had some school stuff going on. They've put one of my children on social media for the third time, even though they're not supposed to. So I'm trying to manage that process without losing it as well, which isn't ideal. But my point is, there's all these little things going on, and I have to keep reminding myself, nothing is too serious. You know, we're not dealing... I'm going to touch them with somewhere, but we're not dealing like a serious illness or something, you know, really shocking going on. It is that everyday craziness. And it's not, normally my craziness is managing work and parenting. And we talk about that, you know, fairly often on this podcast. That's, you know, that juggle is really hard. But actually this week, that's not, you know, work is totally fine. Work's actually my happy place at the moment. And it's all these other little things. And it really got me thinking of, we just don't know what people are dealing with day to day. There's all kinds of things people are juggling, which is why I mentioned, you know, Jake and medication, because, you know, it's not totally relevant to life. But the point is, there's all these strange things, random things that people are dealing with day after day, and things are compounding and piling on top of each other. And it's, you know, your attention's getting split across all these different areas. And it's really hard to function as a useful, productive, happy human when loads of that stuff's going on.
I think that's such a good point, because we sort of think that in order for us to be completely unable to cope. Something really terrible has to have happened. But actually, you know, it's totally normal to not be able to cope when lots of little, not catastrophic things have happened, because we are all dealing with lots of different things, and it's hard to quantify whether we're dealing with more now than we ever have been in the past, because how could you ever quantify that really? But certainly I notice when I speak to people, either clients or, you know, just people who I chat to on a day-to-day basis, friends or people who I meet in the street. I don't just talk to strangers in the street, but, you know, I do think there's this sort of the surface level, everybody looks fine.
Yeah.
But once you actually get under the surface, everybody's dealing with something hard. And you know, I think we do need a bit of a space to acknowledge that. And it's not saying that we kind of just, you know, all should give up and it's all awful. But actually it is saying, no, it's okay that sometimes these things get too much and that it's hard. And I suppose part of what we're trying to do with this podcast is work out, okay, well, so acknowledging that, how do we move on and how do we support each other and what are the things we can do? And I know one of the things, and it actually segues quite nicely into what we were going to talk about today. And I think one of the things that I've worked on over the years in particular is managing and regulating emotions and dealing with those really tricky emotions that come up, especially in those kind of day-to-day scenarios, you know, and you have those sort of day-to-day things and you're thinking to yourself, wow, I'm having a big old reaction to this, even though there's nothing particularly terrible about what's going on. You know, I often use the example of my little boy not wanting to brush his teeth. That always seems to come at the time when I'm kind of like at my most tired. And I just think to myself, why am I getting so wound up about this? But you know, in fairness, it's because we are human beings who are not robots, and there are lots of emotions going on for us, and how we regulate them depends on what else has been going on. It depends on our hormones. It depends on how much we slept last night. It depends on what else is going on in our lives, like, you know, all those different things that you've just described there. As you say, individually, they're not catastrophic. However, they are really challenging. So let's talk about emotions, shall we? And how we deal with them. Emotional intelligence. Big topic, Gemma.
It's a very big topic. Emotional intelligence is probably one of the things that I, over my career, have talked about most. And the reason for that is I have a course on LinkedIn Learning called Developing Emotional Intelligence, which is, I filmed it.
I'll interject and say it is one of, if not the most, one of the most popular courses on LinkedIn Learning ever. It is an incredibly popular and incredibly brilliant course, if I might add, as well, because it really unpacks emotional intelligence in a way that's so easy to understand and is totally identifiable and relatable. So it's really, it's, you know, it's not hard to see why it's so popular as a course, but it's also, I think it's really interesting to see that it is so evergreen as a topic, that people, particularly in the workplace, because obviously LinkedIn Learning is a workplace learning tool, it's very interesting that people are constantly coming back to learning about emotional intelligence, because it's obviously something that people are really feeling that they need to get better at. So sorry, I interjected there, but I just wanted to it's hard for you to say that.
Yeah, 100%. There's no value. I was going to say that. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind on the emotional intelligence front, because, so it's a course that I wrote, the original course, so there's been 2 versions of it now. So the original course I wrote when I was pregnant with my first baby, and I filmed it when I was pregnant.
I don't know how you did that.
I don't know. And actually, there's a whole story behind that as well. We'll share that for another podcast, maybe like overcoming challenges or things, because it looks really slick, the course, but I was not feeling slick at all.
Because it was quite early on in the pregnancy, wasn't it?
Yeah. I was being sick in between filming and battling.
Oh my God.
Ridiculous imposter syndrome. I just remember getting to the studios in California and thinking, why the hell am I here? Why they, like, surely there must be someone else that can do this. Why am I here? And I didn't realize what a big setup it was. You know, we're talking, you know, 12 film studios and massive, great big cameras and a sound team and a makeup artist and like I was so out of my depth and so overwhelmed. I'm actually quite surprised the course came out okay. But the second one, I refilmed it probably a couple of years ago, but we did that remotely because there's not so much travel to the US anymore. But anyway, I'm digressing on that front. But I think what's interesting about that course is, like you say, it's still really popular. It's still a topic I get asked about all the time. I get asked about emotional intelligence all the time. And it's something that I know really well. And I think kind of going back and looking at it, when I was preparing for today, actually, I was thinking about how I was actually looking at how emotional intelligence is described in general in research terms, and how I talk about it in that course. And actually, well, shall I give you a definition?
Give us a definition.
Okay, here we go. Yes. Okay, I did this morning before the session. I was like, okay, firstly, a bit like resilience, which is my research topic, my doctorate research topic. There is no one standard definition for emotional intelligence. That won't surprise you in the psychology research
but actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't think that's such a bad thing, because I would be suspicious of anything that is this complex, emotional intelligence or resilience, that you can just put in a box.
Yeah, agreed.
Because I think maybe we'll come back to that later, because I think that's one of the maybe criticisms of the way emotional intelligence is sometimes applied in the workplace, that it's nicely wrapped up in a bow for us all, but actually, in fairness, there's nothing wrappable, uppable about emotional intelligence or emotion in general. So
there can't be, because it's about emotions, which you know, it's there's so much complexity and nuance with that. And it's so personal to everyone. So I think, it's one of those topics that we've tried to make very standardized. And I'm not sure how easy that is to do. So Daniel Goleman, who has done tons and tons of work on emotional intelligence, he's got loads of books on it. And it's his kind of theory of emotional intelligence that I use. So that's what I use in all my teaching. So his definition is emotional intelligence is the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating others, and for managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationships. Now, all of those words make sense, and that sentence makes sense. But I get to the end of it and just think, what the hell? Like,
I'm not going to lie, I tuned out a little bit towards the end.
Well, I mean,
managing self, yada yada yada. Got it.
And I think that's what makes it. And actually, I chose a quote from Daniel Goleman because that's the work that I use. But equally, because there were loads of choices to choose from here, I tried to choose the most simple version. And I think partly where we've got a little bit wrong with emotional intelligence is that we've made it quite complex. So the way that I look at it is there are 4 quadrants. This is the model that I use. There are 4 quadrants to emotional intelligence. And I think this is all you need to know in terms of a definition. So once you know what these 4 quadrants are, you can work out what emotional intelligence means. So the first is self-awareness, so understanding your own emotions, your own reactions to events. The second is self-management, so thinking about how you manage those emotions. I have a bit of an issue with this management word, which we can come back to potentially. I prefer a bit of navigating. Management sounds like we're doing something wrong and we need to change it, which I'm not a fan of.
Totally, yeah.
But anyway, that's part of the quadrant. So self-awareness, self-management. So that's kind of like one half, which is inward looking. And then you've got your second half of this 4-part quadrant, which I guess is what a quadrant is. And that's outward looking. So we've got social awareness, so understanding what's going on around you, understanding the context, the environment, other people, and then relationship management. So how do we use all that information, understanding ourselves, understanding others, to build strong relationships? So really it's about understanding and navigating your emotions, understanding others, and building strong relationships with all that info together. And I think, in whatever context in life, who doesn't want to do that better? Who doesn't, there'll be certain bits we're great at, there'll be certain bits that are challenging. There'll be times where we're doing really well in a quadrant. We might be really self-aware for a while, but we might not always be. It might be, context might change, might not be. So I think, breaking it down and making it simple like that is a really I think, a really useful way of looking at it, and that's probably why that course has done so well, in all fairness, because I did my best to make it as scientific as it can be. It's based on research, but it's quite simple in terms of how it's explained, which I know lots of psychologists historically don't like simple, but I'm a big fan of taking complex theory and making it as simple as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But what is I'm going to pause here for a sec, and I want to get your thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on the term emotional intelligence? Does that sound like a loaded question?
I had a feeling you were going to ask me that. It's a really hard one to answer because it's been a term that's been around for so long. I mean, I remember even when Daniel Goleman's book first came out, and it was sort of this big moment in probably self-help book history. And, you know, I would have been obviously quite a bit younger than I am now. And, you know, this idea that we can learn to be more emotionally intelligent, which I know that we can learn to navigate our emotions better. We can learn to regulate our emotions. But I think to be more emotionally intelligent kind of starts to put a bit of almost like a judgment on it. Like I'm more, or even you hear people saying that in the workplace, this person is more emotionally intelligent than that person. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like pitting people against each other in terms of how emotionally intelligent they are. And if you have to kind of unpack that and go, well, is that really what are your criteria for making that judgment? So I'm not sure about the term. I can kind of see, I think the positives of it actually are that it is brought to the fore that, the human traits and the human side of us are as important as, IQ in being successful at work, for example. So I think that's where it's, if you put in those simple terms, if you look at IQ and EQ together, it's like, well, actually, it's really useful to remember that this isn't all about our technical skill. It actually is a lot about, being successful at work and in life and managing ourselves. It is, there I go again with that word managing, but it is also a lot to do with us being human and being able to do that. So from that perspective, I think I can see why it has gained prominence as a term. I remember doing the EQI a few years ago and thinking to myself, because obviously I'm a psychologist, I'd been working at that point in the workplace for a good long time, and I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm very emotionally intelligent because, I'm very good at judging dynamics in situations. At that point, I'd been, researching and assessing culture within teams and within organizations and identifying different dynamics and the emotions of others and also coaching people. And so at that point I thought, oh, sure, I must be really emotionally intelligent. And actually what came back was I am pretty good at those things, at the social awareness part of it, but actually my self-management and my self-awareness wasn't quite as strong. And actually, in fairness, at the time, I think, I think I had a small child, a small baby, and I was probably, that side of me, I was probably in not a very adaptive fashion, but I was probably kind of just suppressing all of my emotions on that side of things just to try and get through, the challenges of having a small baby and working and all of the rest of it. But I do remember having that feeling of, ooh, have I failed at emotional intelligence then? Is that what that is? So, yeah, for all of those reasons. And then, we can get into whether it's useful to have these kind of assessments in the workplace around things like emotional intelligence and other personality assessments as well. That's another thing we should put a pin in and talk about again. But I don't like it when it has that impact on you. And, as though it's this kind of judgment on you. Is there something wrong with you if you're not good at a certain aspect of it? So anyway, what do you, was that the right answer?
Correct. No, no, totally. I agree with everything you say. I think the intelligence part is really hard to get your head around. I like the fact that you have looked into the positives of this as well. So you've got to remember, this is a topic that I talk about all the time. So it's something I believe in. It's something I think we should be thinking about. And even the definition, like there's a lot to encompass in a definition. That's why it's so long, because we're talking about a lot of things kind of at play together. And we're looking at, what factors influence emotional intelligence, what the outcome could be. And all of that's got to be in a definition. So it does make it a bit complex. And I think it's a really big topic. I think the intelligence part is the bit that I struggle with, although I don't have an alternative. And I do feel like in life you shouldn't really criticize something unless you have a great alternative. But this wasn't my term to start with. This wasn't what I was researching to start with. So again, exactly as you, I like the highlight on emotions, how we manage emotions, being more self-aware, being more socially aware. I think those are really positive things to think about in life, and really great skills in some sense, because it can be skill-based skills for us to get better at and to work on in different points. But I think the intelligence part, because IQ, which is general intelligence, is a set figure, and when I don't actually know what my IQ is, but people that do know what their IQ is, i.e. they're part of Mensa, for example, that's why they know their IQ. It's quite competitive. It's a number, and you want that number to be as high as possible if that's what floats your boat. If you want to prove that you're very intelligent or know that you are. So I think it's the intelligence bit that I find really difficult. And there are certain elements to it as well that I find a little bit challenging. So, for example, there's a big part in the relationship management part. A core part of that is empathy. So developing empathy to be able to understand people better and to be able to get through challenges with other people better. And there is a lot of research around that. I don't think we can deny the fact that if you are someone that displays a lot of empathy, you probably do find that easier, understanding other people and perhaps changing your approach when you're dealing with different people based on what they could be experiencing. However, what makes me feel a bit uneasy about this is we now know, as research is kind of progressing in the world of psychology, not everyone has the ability to display empathy in the same way. It's not a level playing field. We're not all starting from the same place. So think about neurodiversity, for example, how our brains all work differently. There might be certain types of neurodiversity, or even just different types of personality of people that actually finds it really difficult to practice empathy. And empathy is feeling someone else's emotions as if you're feeling them yourself. So it could be that some people just physically can't do that. Like they just don't, for whatever reason, feel another person's emotions. Or it could be, and I've experienced this before, where sometimes I think I can feel over empathetic, where I feel it too much. So I kind of almost sometimes have to stop myself before I even go there, because once I go there, I find it really hard to then let go of those feelings, and they're not mine to carry necessarily.
I think that's a huge problem for people, particularly in the workplace, where we're all being sort of drilled to be more empathetic. And I think in a lot of cases for the right reasons, because if you're a member of a team and your boss demonstrates empathy towards you, that's a nice feeling that somebody cares, isn't it? It's a nice feeling that somebody understands. And that's really, we all just want to be kind of understood, particularly if we're having a challenge, we want to be understood. So having the feeling that somebody is empathizing with you is a good feeling. But what if you are a manager of 12 people and you cannot possibly take on the emotion? And I know, technically you probably should not be managing 12 people, but it happens a lot. People are managing way more people than they really should be, or than, is possible for any one person to manage within the space of a week. You cannot possibly physically take on the emotions and the challenges of all those people. That would be completely unproductive and unhelpful for everybody involved. So I agree, I completely agree that we have to be very mindful about how we approach that. And it's not just flippantly, you know, you need to be more empathetic. Because I've heard that in the past as well, you know, people saying to each other, this person just needs to have more empathy. And yeah, I agree on both fronts. Maybe it's that they have a challenge, literally have a challenge feeling that empathy, or maybe it's that they are protecting themselves because they feel it too much. And actually, if they have too much empathy, it's going to be damaging to them and therefore anybody around them. So I think, you know, when I talk to leaders about this, I think you've already said it, but I think I say things like maybe think about demonstrating empathy. So it's that you don't necessarily have to feel it in your body, but doing the things that demonstrate that you are empathizing, like listening actively, saying things that recognize that you understand the person. You don't have to take, but always knowing that you don't have to take it on board. I don't know. What do you think? Is that the right advice?
I do think that's great advice. And actually, it's a really great book that really helped me with this, kind of figure this conundrum out. Because it's challenging. You know, empathy is listed as a part of emotional intelligence. And if you do an emotional intelligence test, you're probably going to be rated on examples of empathy. But there's a really great
book. It's a really important aspect of life. Like we do all have, you know, we do all have to be aware of empathy and feel it in some aspects of our life. But yes, how can we possibly, especially as well in the world of work now, where, you know, we could be connected with in our teams and doing you know, hybrid working across different cultures, and I mean, you could be working with so many different people all the time. You can't possibly have empathy for everybody in your life. That would just be completely mad. So go on, sorry.
It's just so much to expect of someone, I think. So Paul Bloom wrote a book called Against Empathy, which sounds quite shocking. Like, it's quite a shocking title.
It is,
who doesn't want to be empathetic? But his point is exactly as we've been saying. Like, it's sometimes hard to take on other people's emotions, and that is what empathy is. But he proposes something called perspective taking, which I'm on board with 100%. And the difference is, you, no matter how easy or hard you find displaying empathy, you know, there's lots of you know, we've gone through some of the reasons why it can sometimes be challenging. Everyone can do this perspective taking, and what that means is you are imagining what a situation must be like for another person. You don't have to feel it. You don't have to experience it yourself. You don't have to put yourself in their shoes, which is often a way that we describe empathy, is putting yourself in someone else's shoes or putting yourself in their life. But you can ask questions, exactly as you were saying. You can ask questions to find out what's going on in their life. You can be interested. You can offer support. You can ask, basically, and find out more. And that's being curious enough and thoughtful enough to want to know someone else's experience, or want to learn about someone else's experience. So I think we need to update this idea of empathy being part of emotional intelligence with perspective taking, because we can all learn to do that. You could even have a checklist of questions you could ask if you wanted to, and I think it's just a much healthier way of looking at it.
I agree. And is there ongoing research about, and, you know, work about on the 4 quadrants, or is it sort of now a stable construct?
I have to say, most of the research, a lot of the research I've looked at will be things like meta-analysis research. So looking at lots and lots and lots of different studies. And the reason I've been able to do that in this area is that there is so much research on emotional intelligence. So particularly in the workplace, which, you know, we've worked with organisations and teams of people, that's part of our working lives, but also outside of that as well. So thinking about relationships in general. And when we're looking at, so meta-analysis data is where lots of different studies that have measured a construct in some way will be put together and analysed in one great big study. So it pulls all this data in from all over the place. So it's giving you a much broader view of that topic and that research area. And when we're looking at meta-analysis data, they're obviously using different definitions of emotional intelligence, or they might be looking at different parts of emotional intelligence or different measures of emotional intelligence. So I think that's where a lot of the research is at the moment. And I have to say, like, there is a lot of it. So, you know, there's research around emotional intelligence leading to better psychological and physical health, like not just psychological, but actually physical as well.
Wow. Yeah.
Leading to better relationships with others, better performance, potentially. And obviously, this isn't for everyone. We're saying it can lead to these things. But also, one of the things that I get really quite excited about is those that have higher emotional intelligence are more likely to be able to navigate conflict more positively. So it's like positive conflict management. And the reason I love that is because, you know, if we lived in a world with no conflict, where we all thought the same, and we had the same ideas, and I mean, I think that's a scary place to be. We want people with we want people to passionately be for different ideas and putting different ideas in. Think of diversity of thought and experience, and that's how innovation happens. That's how we learn. That's how we grow as individuals, you know, hearing someone else's point of view. And sometimes that is a bit of conflict. And you know, I think having a tool like emotional intelligence, if that helps you to navigate that better, think about, you know, not just work life, think about your home life. Think about kind of arguments and, you know, I'm thinking about my home life, disagreements amongst the family. You know, that's going to happen. That's part of normal life. And I think if we can use emotional intelligence and those 4 quadrants as a tool to help manage that process better, that's good for everyone.
Definitely. And I think that brings it back to where we started, actually. We're in the conversation around, you know, when you're having the challenges of the chaos of everyday life, where do we start and how do we start to use the ideas that you teach in emotional intelligence to navigate it all? Where do we even begin? And I think, you know, but I think I can answer it myself by saying definitely the learning that I have taken on board so much, I think particularly since having kids, because you can't get away with any of this without when you have kids. Before you have kids, you can kind of just plow on in the workplace or whatever, even if you've got challenges, you can sort of just plow on and use maybe not such adaptive coping strategies to get through. Once you've had kids, I mean, there's no escape. You have got to be really on it when it comes to checking in with yourself and making sure that your own emotions you're noticing them, you're working out what's going on for you. So I think that's probably the first step, isn't it? Self-awareness. And that's the ability to check in with what's going on for you.
And I think this is an area that you're really good at quite naturally. Whenever we talk, this idea of checking in, because, you know, self-awareness is a chunky topic and actually all of these 4 quadrants in emotional intelligence are chunky topics on their own. And self-awareness is something, whenever we're talking about something to do with psychology, it all starts with self-awareness all the time. Yeah. And I think you are probably, I feel like you're much better than me at checking in with where you are. I feel like I check in when I'm further down the line, like when I'm noticing I'm really grumpy, or I'm not responding well, or I'm not feeling great in myself. I feel like you catch it earlier than I do. I don't know, I might be wrong on that front, but that's how I feel.
I think that's a really interesting observation. I actually think I have gotten better at that. If I can say that. I don't know. My kids and my husband might not say that. But I think when I think about myself and my own kind of identifying what I need, I think that's, and again, you know, when it comes to anything to do with overwhelm, anxiety, challenging emotions, experiencing discomfort because of whatever, whether it's a physiological issue that you're experiencing or a psychological issue, that discomfort that comes about, I definitely, and I think it has been since I had kids, because probably before that, I just, like I said, I was just able to sort of just dance around it all and just kind of get on with life, even though I probably wasn't, you know, which is probably why I didn't score so highly on that original EQI, but I was probably just able to get on without doing the uncomfortable thing of checking in with what's going on. Whereas then when you have kids and you have to be so attuned to their needs, you then realize, I mean, literally, you could spend your whole life being only attuned to their needs. And then, you know, you realize you can seriously let some bolts drop when it comes to your own. So you've got to, it's almost like something you have to intentionally do to remind yourself. You know, I was telling my dad the other night, set an alarm on your phone to remind yourself to do your breathing, because and I have to do that. I have to remind myself to, you know, we know, and this is probably why emotional intelligence is linked to better physical health, because one of probably the key things around emotional intelligence, especially with the self-awareness piece, is being able to do some good breath work, check in with what's going on with your nervous system, do some deep breathing. And that's all stuff that I would have just slightly rolled my eyes at a few years ago, if I'm honest. Maybe partly deep down because I just didn't want to do the uncomfortable thing, because it's actually sometimes can be a bit uncomfortable, can't it? Doing deep breathing. I mean, oh, come on. I'd much rather scroll on Instagram.
It's all a bit new age, isn't it? Sometimes you think about it. However, really important, and I do it but also it's also fairly fashionable as well. You know, think about mindfulness and meditation, and I think we need to jump on that. But I think setting a note in your calendar or having something pop up is a really good way of doing that. But there are, and this is very different for everyone. So, what I would say about self-awareness as well when it comes to emotional intelligence, that isn't actually about changing anything. It's just being aware of, you know, say like you fly off the handle at someone in the car, or you're really snappy with someone at home, or you send an email that in hindsight you look back and think, maybe I shouldn't have written that. I think it's useful to just take a moment and reflect on, okay, what's going on here? What's actually going on here? Why am I saying? Is it, you know, sometimes it's physical, sometimes you're really tired, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're worn out emotionally, or sometimes you're frustrated, or so. I guess my tip around that is taking moments when you notice any kind of emotion. It could be joyful, it could be frustration, it could be any moment. Just be like, okay, why is that? What's going on here? You won't always have the answer, but sometimes you will.
Okay too.
That's okay too. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, you know, and again, that's something I've learned more over the years, is just, you know, sometimes I actually say to myself, God, I'm procrastinating on responding to that. And then I realize, no, I'm not procrastinating. I'm giving myself space to reply in a way that is true to me, actually, you know, because when your emotions are heightened about something, and it might not even be to do with whatever the email or the text messages said, but when your emotions are heightened, you are less able to think critically about what you want to say and how you want to represent yourself. So I always say to myself or to anyone else, if they're angry about something, just think about it, just take a little time, do something else, and then come back.
That is a brilliant tip, and that's something I talk about as well in this kind of emotional management part. So even though I kind of have a bit of sometimes a bit of a tricky relationship with this idea of emotional management, it's not that I don't think we should be managing our emotions. It's that I also believe that we are allowed to just feel our emotions. Like, we don't have to be changing. Well, we can't change how we feel anyway. It's so quick. It's such a quick physical response. We can't change our emotions, and we can also make a choice. Like, you might think, and I give a good example of this. Sometimes I can't believe I just said I give a good example of this. It says me. This is a great example. That's something I do really well. I was like,
say,
check you.
You know, own it. Own that.
Yeah,
great
I'm going to own that.
Gemma,
I know.
I say.
Go me. No, it's not that great. Honestly, and also don't get too excited. It's not too mind-blowing either. I feel like I've set that up. But an example of having an angry reaction to someone, and I've got a few of these in my life where I have purposely shown an angry reaction. So there's been times where someone might have said, God, you were really angry and you responded like that, or you were, and actually there's been a choice, because I mean, not every time, sometimes I just react and I'm like, oh geez, why did I do that? Actually, that's fairly often, but sometimes it's purposeful, because I'm like, well, no, because that other party or that person needs to know that that's not acceptable. That's why I'm showing that. So it's not that, you know, there's emotions we should be showing and emotions we shouldn't be showing. But what I would say, so one of the tips that I talk about fairly often is exactly as you said, is give yourself time. So if you can break the chain reaction between feeling something and responding, you can then choose to respond, maybe in the same way. You might still do the same thing. Or you might not. You might write the email differently. You might say the thing differently to someone else. You might And you won't always get this right. Sometimes you can do it. I
Mm.
mean, God, I can't, if you came and watched me for 24 hours, I'm sure there's a lot of work that could be done on this front in my house. I can be fairly hot-headed, I'd say, sometimes. I try and regulate as much as I can.
But I think that's such an important point, though, right? Because you're an absolute expert on this topic. I know a reasonable amount about emotional regulation. We're both psychologists. We know a lot about this stuff. However, that doesn't necessarily always mean that we are able to practice everything that we know about it. And that's because we're human. So I think, again, it's so important to remind everyone that, even though you know it, don't beat yourself up for, first of all, for having uncomfortable emotions, because those are supposed to be there. They're literally there as a signal to you, to let you know what your body needs, let you know what you need to do for yourself in general. But also, if you've had what you might call or might label an irrational response to something, you've let that emotion turn into an angry email or turn into an angry interchange with somebody. Again, you're only human. And of course, as we would always say, is again, this podcast, it's all about then learning from it and learning from, okay, well, that wasn't an ideal response. What can I do next time when I notice that emotion coming again? And I think, one thing that you said there is, it's okay to have these emotions. And one of the things that I, again, have learned to do, and this is probably through teaching from emotional intelligence, but also through acceptance and commitment therapy, which I talk about quite a lot. I'm a big fan of this skill of psychological flexibility, and just that really simple reframe of, instead of I feel angry, just I notice that I'm feeling angry. So it's just literally you're separating yourself from the emotion. So that's, and in Irish, in the Irish language, instead of saying, so if I wanted to say I'm sad in Irish, in the Irish language, I'd say Tá brón urim, which directly translated means there is sadness on me. And so instead of saying I am sad, it's there's sadness on me, which I really love. And I think in a way, that probably translates to Irish people being probably in general more aware of their emotions, because it literally, because I'm so interested in how language shapes the way we think, and it really definitely does. But so instead, or Tá fearg urim is I have anger on me. So instead of, so it really makes it feel like a temporary thing that is on me. It's with me, but it's not, it doesn't define me. And I think, again, that's such an important and interesting way of thinking about it. And I think it's helpful.
It's really helpful. And I have to try and sometimes remind myself, and I'm like, oh, I'm really angry. And I'm like, no, it doesn't make me an angry person. Or, you could be like, I'm such a sad person, or I'm such a frustrated person. No, you're just feeling angry at the moment. And I love that. Like, I notice that I'm feeling, and because when you notice something like that, exactly as you said, it can change. But I love that. I love the Irish phrase. I think we should all be doing that. And it makes everything so transient as well. Emotions go up and down. They're little data points all day long that is telling us something.
Totally.
And that's the other thing. We can do something with it, or we don't have to. We don't have to. If you're feeling something straight away, sometimes we have to respond. Like, it's urgent, we have to. Or sometimes, we're right up to here. We've had enough, and it's the last thing, and it's just is going to spill out of us. And I think that's okay. It's how we manage those things after, I think, is important. Yeah. But sometimes we can kind of question ourselves. Like, I had an experience today where I thought, do I have to say that today? I really wanted to say it. I really, really wanted to say it. This is quite hard for me sometimes. And I just thought to myself, it's actually, do I need to say any more today? So I already started saying something. I was like, do I really need to say more on that today? And I'm like, inside me, like, it wants to burst out. And I was like, actually, just give it 5 minutes. If I still want to have that conversation in 5 minutes, maybe I will. And actually, I was like, it's not, it's fine. It's kind of, it's subsided, or it's not as important now. Or like thinking, is this going to be important tomorrow or in a week? Or, and I know this can be hard to do in the moment. Believe me, I don't often do this in the moment. But the other thing about managing emotions as well, so one of the other things that I think we can all do in some way or another, and again, I feel like you're really good at this, or better than me at this lots of times, is thinking about what you need. So is it breathing? Is it
Oh, yeah.
meditation? Is it exercise? Is it a walk? Is it some kind of self-care? Is it a book?
Mm-hmm.
Is it connecting with someone? Is it a cuddle? Is it
Yeah.
walking a dog? Is it and I don't know if we give ourselves in general enough time to think about those things. You know, if we notice we're experiencing something, what might be able to help with that? And I'm not saying you can do it straight away. You know, I can't be in the middle of standing on stage somewhere experiencing fear, probably, and be like, do you know what would really help right now? Just reading a chapter of my book. So I'm just going to leave this here. You guys read these slides. I'll come back in and out. Just, you know, give me 20 minutes. I'm just going to calm myself down with a chapter of my book. Of course I can't. Like, I get that. Although you could do a quick breathing exercise. You could do a little reframing exercise for sure. But I think there's something in kind of checking in with what we need as well. And it'll be different at different times.
And I think that's it. And again, maybe one of the things that comes with building emotional intelligence, or whatever you might want to call it, is knowing what to do in those different times. So you have your little toolkit, and I know that's a really overused analogy, but let's just call it a toolkit for now. You know, you have your little toolkit that goes, right, ooh, I'm noticing I'm feeling this. This is what I need this minute. And because, you know, as you say, right, sitting down, listening to a podcast is not going to work in the middle of a working day if you're in the middle of meetings, but taking 2 minutes to go and breathe might be the thing that you need. So, or might be the thing that will work in that moment. So yeah, I think it's about, and again, that's probably part and parcel of psychological flexibility. So knowing what you need and what action you need to take at what moment can really, really help to set you up then to take the right action that, again, that kind of represents you well, so that is aligned with your own values, is aligned with what you're trying to get to, and aligned with what you and whoever's around you, because it's always not obviously always about you and me. It can be about whoever you're with. So, you know, in the situation that you're in at the moment, obviously you're having challenges at home, whether it's with sleep or with Jake's medication. So it's, you know, it would be one thing for you to be able to check in and go, well, what do I need here? But actually, what you need to, you do need to check in with that, but you also need to check in with what everybody else needs as well. So it's complex. So that's why, we're not saying, that's why at the beginning we sort of said this is not something that we can just teach a team to do. We can certainly make it simple, as you have so brilliantly in that course. We can make it simple for people to understand and to apply, but we can't kind of really whittle it down to something that, you know, kind of, as probably is so often done in organizations, is sort of put on a learning path to improve performance, for example, to, you know, improve productivity. That's not what this is about. This is actually really about tuning in with ourselves and showing up as fully fledged, wild, chaotic human beings, and managing that, right?
I agree. And I think actually you just made a really good point as well, a little bit about social awareness as well, in that we have to understand what others need as well, because, you know, it is complex. It is a balance. We're in these little systems, whether it be your family system, whether it be your work life system. You know, often it's not just us thinking about what we need. There are so many other factors we need to be thinking of to function well. And I think, you know, that does come a little bit into the social awareness part of emotional intelligence. And one of the things I always recommend here is actually comes down to a little bit of mindfulness as well, and being present. It's actually using your senses to figure out what's going on around you. So, i.e.,
yes,
isn't it like? Does
Tell
it
us
make
about
sense?
that. Yeah, because you did a great video on this. I loved it. Go on.
And it's like thinking about, okay, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell? You can do taste if you're eating something. What can I feel? Like, what's, you know, what can you feel about it? But think about it. So from a personal context, you might be able to do that with your family. You might go for a walk in the forest and think about that. Or you might be walking through a city or on a bus or with your friends, or, you know, if you're on your own. But from a work context, you could even do this. And I know I know a lot of people are working in a virtual capacity or a hybrid capacity. So not everyone is going into an office like the old days. I totally get that. But if you are ever in that situation and you want to start building your self-awareness, you can walk through the office and do a take of, like, because, you know, how often do we I think about commuting. When I used to commute 5 days a week, I wouldn't even be able to tell you what I'd seen on my way to work. because either on the train or the tube or when I was driving, because you just see the same thing every day. You don't notice it.
No.
It's the same in an office. You can walk through and be like, oh, three new things I can notice. Let's see. Two sounds I can hear. It could be someone on a phone, it could be someone tapping, it could be a conversation, it could be whatever. And I feel like this exercise, it does seem a little bit like, well, what the hell has that got to do with building strong relationships with other people? But actually, it's training yourself in the skill of noticing things outside yourself, things going on around you. And that helps you to build social awareness over time, and you extend that, you keep going with that kind of practice, and you can start to learn a bit more about social dynamics. So, like, you've ever been in a meeting, you're like watching how everyone's interacting, you're thinking, this is fascinating. I'm learning so much just by viewing how people talk to each other, or what they talk about, or who speaks, who doesn't. And that's also not just a work context. Think about, I think about when my children started a new school, trying to figure out the parent dynamics or the school dynamics, or, you join a new club, you join a running club, what are the social dynamics here? These skills of understanding what goes on outside of us can help with all of those things over time. And I feel like we've kind of, the main thing that we've talked about when it comes to relationship management is this idea of perspective taking and asking questions to understand the other person.
And although it does seem almost kind of obvious, actually, we do have to get ourselves into the habit of doing these types of things, because that's, because we know the brain is plastic. We know that if we're in our own habitual way of seeing the world, we'll continue to be and do it that way, because that's just the way the neural pathways are programmed. Whereas if we really actively try even to just change that a tiny bit, as you say, through noticing what's going on around us, or through asking questions, through really kind of deliberately asking more questions, those things will start to become habit over time. And you will start to learn and be more focused on other people, and have even just bring that balance, because it's all about a balance, isn't it? It's all about making sure that you're spending enough time tuning into what's going on for you and being aware of what's going on for you, which I think in the past probably I was guilty of not doing enough. But then not overdoing that either, because then if you're overdoing that, you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, and all that really important data points that are, all of those data points that are coming from other people, not just data points, but also interesting, interesting intel from people, gossip, whatever else might be coming from people around you. It's fascinating. I always remember, like, when I first moved to London, one of my favorite things to do is just to sit in the tube and just watch people.
You're like an anthropologist.
I still like doing that, but now it's a little bit less interesting because people are just sitting there with their phones, so they're not really doing as many interesting things. They might be, but I can't see what they're doing because they've got their phones in their hand. So yeah. Okay. So how do we wrap it all up, or is there anything else that you would love to share on that? Because do you know what? I think we've spoken for a while on this one already. I feel like we could talk about this for lots more. So I'm sure we will cover lots of different aspects of this in future episodes. And in fact, that reminds me, Gemma, I'm about to remember to say about the email address. I'm delighted with myself for remembering that. So if anybody listening wants to share an experience that, if something that we've talked about today resonates for you, or, you can relate to, or if you have a way of regulating your emotions, or what do you find in your toolkit that really helps you, put it all in, send it into an email at hello@psychologyinthewild.com. We would absolutely love to hear from you, and obviously also any future topics that you'd like us to talk about. And while you're there, follow, rate, and share the podcast. Anybody who you think might enjoy listening to us rambling on here, we would be really grateful if you could share it with others. So yeah. So what do you think, Jem? Is there anything else that you would really like to share about emotion? I mean, sure, there's loads of things that you'd like to share, but is there anything else?
I think the main thing I like to leave people with when I talk about emotional intelligence is right back at the emotion bit, going back to the start, there are no good or bad emotions. Emotions are experiences and they're telling us something. We don't have to change them all. We're not robots. We're not often going to have the perfect response to other people or challenges, and that's okay. We're learning and we're evolving, and that's part of the human experience. And I hope at the end of this session, people listening would feel like it doesn't have to be really complicated. It really doesn't.
Yeah.
You just need to think about those 4 areas and think about what stands out for you. Like, are you in a place where you want to become more self-aware, or you want to learn how to regulate your emotions more, or you want to build that social awareness, or is relationship management the part you want to delve into? And my biggest piece of advice is, if you know that, and all these quadrants will go up and down, it's not fixed, it's not like IQ where it's fixed. Emotional intelligence changes. It's also context driven and experience driven, and it changes over time. But if there are any areas that you want to know more about, firstly, let us know, because that's stuff that we can delve into happily. Also, just exactly as you said, Erin, earlier, find some tools in those quadrants that might work for you. Add them to your toolkit and use them when you need them. And actually, I've got a whole course on different kind of techniques for the different parts of emotional intelligence. It's and you don't necessarily need that. There's other ways of finding that information out, but it's all about being flexible. So knowing what works for you at different times. And my biggest piece of advice with any of the stuff we talk about is just build up your different tools. It could be a breathing technique, it could be some kind of self-care, it could be that sensory audit in social awareness, so what's going on around you. Just build up all these different techniques and learn to use them, test them out, and learn when they work for you.
And then just notice when they work for you. And I sometimes get into the habit of telling I might sorry, Gemma, but I might call you up, or I might leave you a voice note and tell you when something has worked, or jot it, because I think it's so useful to kind of even just jot it down. And even sometimes I find journaling, it just kind of goes into the abyss, so I don't tend to remember to do it, but I'd be more likely to maybe tell somebody else, oh, I found this particular resource that's really helpful, and do that, because the more you notice what works for you, the more you'll remember to do it the next time at that particular same kind of junction of the, as you described, the context and the experience and everything that's going on. There's all sorts of different, it's like a confluence of different things that happen that create different particular emotions or different particular experiences that you have. So it's worthwhile remembering what works.
So any last advice from you?
No, I think that, as I said, I think I could talk about this for hours. So I think let's leave it there for now. But I would love to hear what other people might like us to kind of delve into deeper on this topic, because I think it's just something that's so useful. And I am just a real constant learner on this one. Like I say, with anything to do with emotional intelligence or with psychological flexibility, it's never something that I'm going to feel like I've mastered, and I think that's okay. So keep learning.
Yeah, same here. And on that note, I will see you next time. Stay safe in the wild.
You too, Gemma. Take care of yourself.